I want to have a conversation with you today, or start a conversation today, about the idea of moving beyond the farm gate and looking at opportunities of creating paddock to plate relationships, the role tourism can play in that, but also looking at how regional food systems on a business-to-business trading basis can actually help to reinvigorate regional economies, but importantly help farmers to be more viable and help meet consumer demand that's out there in regional Australia today. There's a lot to get through, so I'll get through some of these slides. Am I doing this correctly? That one. That's counterintuitive for me. Okay. I want to talk to you about some challenges that we have in a tourism perspective. So from a tourism perspective, we have an issue in regional Australia, and that is that tourism is tired. It's a bit like me today, staying up a bit late, trying to do a bit much, but not actually focusing on what we really need to do. And I guess the idea of having what we used to do in regional areas from a tourism perspective to what consumers want today, what visitors to our communities want today, is very different. Visitors are no longer content to sit in a bus and drive through a town and look out the window. They actually want to immerse themselves in our regional community. They want to meet the people. They want to eat our food, drink our wine and other beverages. They want to learn a bit about our life. They want a part of our life. They want to experience what they perceive our rural way of life to be. And they don't get that if they stay in a motel on the fringe of town and don't actually interact with locals or taste the produce that we produce. The other issue tourism's got is that there's increased competition due to a wider variety of international destinations that are really accessible now. We've got these wonderful low-cost airlines, but they're really sending people overseas, especially with a high Australian dollar, or they're sending them to other locations. As a result, it's making it a little bit difficult for Australian regions to compete in that marketplace. If we don't have a compelling value proposition, it's very hard to attract tourism. The other issue we've got is that we're changing the way we holiday. We used to have a 4-week break and we'd go to the beach or we'd go somewhere, we'd go out to the country and stay with relatives. That's changing too. So people are taking shorter breaks and more frequently. So they don't travel the vast distances that they used to travel before. So the other key issue is the reduction of the discretionary income. So people are spending money on cost of living pressures and other things. And perhaps when they think about, well, what am I going to get from a holiday? I might go away for a week or a few days. I spend a lot of money on accommodation and food and sightseeing, and what am I left with? I've got a short break, a few memories, a couple of extra kilos perhaps from eating regional food and wine, but what have I got to show for it? Where I could probably spend the same amount of money on a television and put it in the lounge room, or maybe build a pool, and it's there for quite a long time. So that discretionary income, people are looking at how they're spending that. So in order to attract people to our regional destinations, to our regional communities, we really need to put forward a compelling value proposition. And I think that's really an important factor that we've got to look at. I now want to talk to you about agriculture, probably something that a lot of you are very familiar with. So I guess in this section, I'm not going to tell you anything new, but I'm going to pull together some of the information that's really influenced our thinking in developing an approach that's really about regional food systems and connecting paddock to plate. So we all know that agriculture's got a significant challenge out there at the moment, and that is that it's really hard to make money. You either have to get big or you have to add value in order to be able to earn the money that you used to earn from agriculture. It's very competitive out there. The Australian dollar isn't helping if you're an exporter, but it's also not helping when we compare our produce at home with product that can be imported from overseas. And so as a consequence to that, you find that we've got this agricultural migration to the poles, where you've got small farms becoming less viable and reducing in size and viability, and large farms getting bigger and the numbers of them getting bigger. And what we're now seeing is that foreign investment is coming in and buying some of those large farms. And that's not great for our food security. It's not great for the viability of our regional communities. It's certainly not great for the viability of an individual farmer. So something's got to give. And then if I can go back to Sarah's presentation and we look at, you know, this is a familiar site. This isn't an Australian photograph, but it could be. And that's a really scary thought, where you've got paddocks that are turned into housing developments. And what that causes is, not only does it cause conflict between the residents and the farmer, not only is it a loss of that agricultural land, but what it's doing is making it difficult for the farmer to be able to work the land around them, because residents don't come with an attitude of I'm moving in, therefore I have to accept what's happening on the farm around me. They move in and all of a sudden the farmer has to change his practice. So all of these impacts are making it difficult, but farmers are forced to take that sort of activity because it's hard to make a buck out of farming. We've also got this interesting scenario in Australia where traditionally we have pushed food onto the market as agriculture. We have had a supply chain model where we've really pushed it out into the market and then expected the consumer to buy it. And as a result of this particular supply chain model, farmers are disempowered. Once food leaves the farm gate, once it's shipped off their property, they've lost complete control over what the consumer does, how much the consumer pays for it, and how indeed that product's got there. And all along the way, you see, let's see if this is the pointer, it is, thank goodness for that, you find that there are other people who are adding value before the producer actually gets hold of it. Now in this case it's grapes turning into wine, but it could be milk turning into cheese, it could be wheat turning into bread. So or pasta or any other product. So all along the way you can see, other people are taking their slice of the pie in that supply chain. And possibly the most challenging thing we've got in Australia is a really convoluted system where a farmer does completely lose control of what's happening with their product, where food's sold to the majors, or it goes to a central market, or it's distributed through this national distribution or this commodity-based process. The other option is we do sometimes sell food locally, sometimes it goes to local distributors, sometimes it goes to independent retailers, but that's really at the margins. It's not the majority of what's happening out there. What's happening with a lot of the food that we're eating in regional Australia is it's actually coming from the central markets back into the region and then being distributed through this model. It's very hard for a producer to be able to connect with the consumer when they've got to make their way through this maze. This system's got to change in order for farmers to be able to take control of that paddock to plate relationship. And that's really what today is about. And by being able to solve that riddle, solve that maze, solve that problem, we can start to get those tourism outcomes as well. It's not all doom and gloom. In fact, there's this beautiful window of opportunity that's out there at the moment, and that is there's this thing called a pull factor from a consumer. There's a global trend at the moment where consumers are really concerned about where their food's coming from. They want to know who grew it, they want to know how it was grown, they want to know where it was grown, and they're very conscious about how much the farmer's been paid, they're very conscious about the method of production, and they're also conscious about how long has that product been out of the paddock or out of the pack house, how far away was that farmer. So food miles is an important part, but it all comes back down to health and nutrition and accessibility to food. So consumers are now asking questions. The number one food trend coming out of America at the end of last year was towards localism and sourcing and knowing the provenance of that food, where that food product comes from. And we're now seeing that happen in Australia as well. So what this does is it creates a really good opportunity for Australian farmers to be able to move beyond the farm gate, beyond that traditional method of distributing our food, to something more, something that creates higher yield and greater opportunities. This has come from a fellow by the name of Professor David Hughes. He was the keynote speaker at the National Farmers Federation conference in Brisbane last year. And he's a world authority on food marketing, a food marketing guru. Anyway, his slide, we've adapted it slightly, and he talks about, no, he doesn't talk about that, he talks about this. He talks about this idea of a consumer migration to the poles, where yes, we have got this global food movement, and these are the customers that are forced to go to Coles and Woolworths. I don't think anybody goes there voluntarily these days. But anyway, these guys, people who are going to these stores or buying food, are in a mindset where food has to be high-tech, it's about price, it needs to be convenient, it needs to be cost-effective, and it needs to be available all year. They don't think about the source of the food a great deal. But that's not the market that we're looking at when we talk about regional food systems and agri-tourism. What we're looking at is the other end of the spectrum that is increasing in size and growing as a trend. And this is where consumers are looking to the local nature of the food. Where did my food come from? How was it produced? They value things. They value the story of the farmer, the production methods, the quality and the taste of the food, and they're willing to pay more for better value for money. those other components, the story, the quality, the freshness, add value to those products. And I think it's really important that we focus on this opportunity, which has never really been there before in our farming environment. It's not just a trend that's happening in small boutique locations. When you've got companies like Walmart, who are the biggest retailer of food in America, in fact, they're the biggest retailer in the world, I understand, they've actually introduced buy local policies. And not only is it, it's not happening just because they think, all of a sudden they have a bleeding heart and they're helping the farmer. They're doing it because they want to stop leakage to local food outlets. They want to stop that migration to farmers markets and small independent retailers. They want to be able to capture that space. And it's not just in America, it's happening in Australia too. And you can start to see the marketing and the promotion in our big majors. And this was done, actually it was coincidentally same day. In America, the Walmart release, and in Australia, the Woolies release. And it was quite an amazing thing to see happen at different parts of the world, obviously not coordinated. But what this is telling us is that the market opportunity is there and the majors are trying to take advantage of it. So why shouldn't we? Well, this is why it's really difficult for a farmer to be able to move beyond the farm gate. So all of these are problems that make it hard for farmers to move beyond it. It's an intractable problem that one individual farmer can't do on their own, nor can a retailer do it on their own. We need this cluster approach, we need to work together, we need to change the system basically, and that's really what we're about. If we can change the system that sits behind our local food, we make it easier to source, easier to identify, make it accessible and affordable, more people will choose local food. And more farmers will be able to increase their margins and diversify and value add and increase the yield. And profitability. Profit's not a dirty word. One of the key issues we've got is, though, it's very hard to tell what's local and what's not. So for a consumer, if given two options where they walk into a shop and they choose a tomato or an onion or a potato or a carrot, let's not talk wine and glamorous food, let's talk basic staples. If they knew the difference between a local product that's come more directly from the farmer and something that they don't know the source of, and they're competitively priced, they're convenient to access and easy to identify, they will take the local product. Because why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they buy? And that's what we're seeing in trends. But how do we actually help farmers to access this local food? Or how do we allow consumers to access this local food? The other issue we've got is how do producers actually trade with some of those independent retailers and some of those restaurants, etc. Most farmers aren't geared up to be able to put their produce in the front of a bike and trawl around the streets of Toowoomba or the Southern Downs. It's just not in our nature. It may happen in the villages of Europe, but it doesn't happen here. We produce large quantities of food, we put it on a truck and we ship it off to the market. We need a system that emulates that so it's efficient and affordable for farmers to be able to distribute food. We also need to make it easy for restaurateurs to be able to buy that food in and to be able to source that food and preference those goods. So we need a system that'll help our food retailers and tourism operators to be able to source those food and also for farmers to be able to sell directly to them. So we need to be a bit clever. So what we need to do is really look at reorganising this back-end system. This local food distribution system, we can simplify it and make it easier to be able to get product from paddock to plate. So we need to do that as a cluster, and I'm glad to see Sam here from a newly formed group and Sam Palmer from the Southern Downs area. We've formed the Southern Queensland Regional Food Network, and that's about connecting paddock to plate, the supply and the demand, commercial supply and commercial demand of local food. And if we can create a system that helps to distribute food locally, then what we're doing is we're helping our farmers to be able to increase yield and make it more efficient to distribute food. So we can move from this to this, where we can start to take advantage of the consumer pull factor that is asking for local food, and we can help to connect the farmer along the way. So rather than the farmer pushing at this end, we can actually put the farmer in the mix and help them actually be part of that value chain. By working together, we can actually start to help that product get from paddock to plate and to reach the consumer. And by working together, what we can do is, rather than trying to increase a bigger slice of the pie and making your farm bigger with a smaller margin, we can actually grow the size of the pie and share the profitability. And I think that makes a lot more sense. What it also does is it means that our regions start to produce more of the food that we want to eat and that we are eating, rather than what we think the markets are actually going to need. And at the end, what we end up with is a sustainable advantage, a sustainable commercial advantage, a competitive advantage that helps our farmers to be profitable and our agriculture to be viable and sustainable. I think we need to have the word viability right next to sustainability, because without viability we don't have sustainability. And I think it's an important thing to consider. So what we need to do is we really need to look at connecting regional supply and regional demand with a system of regional distribution. Not a system that goes to the city and back, or Sydney and back, or Melbourne and back, because that's what happens to your food now, or it's brought in from other parts of the country or the world. What we need to be able to do is to connect paddock to plate within our region and do it in a way that's cost effective and functional and viable, but both for the seller and the buyer. We need to create a regional food system, a regionally based system of trade that connects the producers, who are the commercial supply side, to the commercial demand side. And by doing that, what we start to create is an economic, social and those environmental or sustainability outcomes. It's not just about food miles. It's not just about that. It's actually about keeping our farms profitable and sharing some of the love between what the consumer pays and what the farmer gets, sharing that between the people in that short supply chain, so there's a greater return to the farmer. And I think that's a really important part of this. The only way we're going to be able to do that is by having a little bit of strategic intervention to get everybody thinking a little differently about how they trade in those business relationships. If we can achieve that, then all of a sudden we can start to facilitate things like agri-tourism, where farmers can invite people onto farm gate. By 2031, and the Wine Federation of Australia developed the National Wine and Food Tourism Strategy, and the aim was that by 2031 we actually motivate people to come to Australia and go to our region specifically for the wonderful food and wine experiences. We're a long way from delivering that, but if we start now, we can start to achieve that. We need to look at key areas of intervention and strategic assistance to help our producers and our commercial demand, the independent retailers and food service sector, to be able to create critical mass of commercial demand for our food within the region. And then all of a sudden we start to create a viable food system. So finally, by connecting paddock to plate, by connecting our rural landscape, our produce, our producers, by connecting the people who grow our food with that commercial demand and the consumer demand, we can start to create a regional economy that is based on those core things that we do very well in this country, and that is agriculture and those rural communities. We can create a catalyst for change in regional economies, and we can start to help agriculture become more viable, and we can start eventually to get those tourism outcomes that we need.